Simple Queries Access 2007. Well, if we have all this data stored in our tables, we need a tool that allows us to draw that information out. That's what our queries are for. In this nugget, we'll take a look at how to create queries in the simplest form. We'll take advantage of the query wizard that's built into Access 2007 to let Access really hold our hand and prompt us along to decide what queries we'd like to run. And then we'll design our own queries where we get to select which table and which fields from the table we'd like to extract information from. Using the design view, we can also set simple criteria such as a date range. We can even sort that information in ascending or descending order. And the best thing about creating a query is that you can save it and reuse that query over and over and over again. Let's go ahead and open up Microsoft Access 2007. From the Start menu, it's now pinned here up front, so I don't have to go to its default location. We've launched Microsoft Access, and some of our most recent databases are listed here. So Zoo, this is the database where we want to do some queries. The Create ribbon is where we can go to access all the different types of objects that we are able to create. We're going to start off using the Query Wizard, and then we'll launch and create a query doing the Query Design view. We have some choices: a simple query, a cross-tab query, which is like a pivot table if you've ever done that in Excel. Find duplicates query, which really is there to clean up that data if you've imported a bulk load of information and you don't want duplicates. You can use this to go back and clean it up. Then you also have the Find Unmatched query wizard that's going to take a look at any orphaned records that exist in a table. Very often you use these queries to pull together information from one table to another. So if you have some records, like maybe an order number that's supposed to be tied to a vendor, but that vendor has since been deleted, you might want to rip all those orders out of there because they might not be valid anymore. We're starting here. This is our first look into a query, so we'll be doing the simple query wizard, but of course we're going to be taking a look at more complicated queries as we move through this information. We get to choose now what base table or multiple tables are we going to use as the data source for our query. Let's go ahead and use the table that is memberships. Now, which fields would we like to use? We could just say, hey, I want to use every single field in that table by hitting the All button. Oops, I didn't mean to do that, we'll pretend. And you could just send them all back to available fields. And here you could just mix and match and choose items one at a time. Maybe we're only looking for a few specific pieces of information here. Last name, zip code, and membership fee, we'll say. Next, well, would we like to see a detail or a summary view? It shows every field of every record, or a summary where we could go into some of the options where we could actually see some calculations. We don't want to hold calculations in our base table, so queries are a very efficient vehicle we can use to, because membership fee holds currency, to sum, average, see the minimum fee, the maximum fee, or even just to count the records in the memberships. We're not going to do a summary because, again, we're getting started here with queries, so we'll go with the detail, and we're going to open the query to data sheet view so we see all that information. Of course, we can toggle into the query view if we'd like to. What title do we want for our query? Let's call it memberships query, but we're also tack the word wizard onto the end of it so it's much more clear for us to know which query we're creating. This is the data sheet view. It looks just like a table, doesn't it? It has all the fields that we chose: our membership ID, last name, zip code, and membership fee. Can you tell how many records we have? Yes, 28 records, and we could bop record to record if we wanted to. We don't have too many, so we would be able to scroll down. That seems strange, doesn't it? We could actually add a new record in there if we wanted to. Yes. Queries are tied to those tables. So if I wanted to go in here and actually make a change to any one of these pieces of information, if I were to open that table back up, it would have that data. I could add new records if I wanted to. I could delete information here. If I delete it here, again, like tables, it is gone forever. And if I needed it, I'd have to recreate it or pull it from backup if I needed to. Well, do you remember that Home tab? When we talked about tables, we mentioned that we've got these records information, we can do sorting and filtering and even locate information, and of course deal with the formatting items up here as well. So I want you to feel comfortable with this query view in that it looks just like a table. Everything you affect here is affecting that base data. But that's not the goal of queries necessarily. The goal of a query is to be able to collect information. We're collecting it from the same table, not from multiple tables. But if you're updating information in a query, you have to be careful that you're updating the information that you want, and in essence that it's all inclusive, since you may only be looking at a few fields from that table. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at Design View. This is really that query area, and you may have heard this called a query by example before. Some people call it a QBE because in essence what you're doing is you're choosing a table. From that table you're choosing which fields you'd like to see in that query, and you can place them down here. In the wizard we chose that we wanted to base our query off of these 4 fields. We have checkboxes in here showing us that we're looking at data from these fields. And to tell you what, to prove it, let's remove the check mark from last name. Anytime you want to refresh your information, you click the Run button. We're back in Datasheet view, and now we're not looking at that last name field. I'll go back to the View menu, and I think I would like to see last name. So I will bring back that check mark. We're going to now create a query straight from Design View, so you get the idea from start to finish. It's never a bad idea to save something when you're in Design View to make sure that any changes you've made will stick. And you may have noticed we now have this memberships query listed down here. It is created. We can go back to it at a later time. And actually, let's go back to it right now. I could just double click on it and I'll rerun the query. Even if data had changed in that base table, because maybe people have forms and they're editing information or other queries that are based off of this, it would have dynamically pulled that information back into this query. So if we want to create a query from scratch, we go back to the Create ribbon, and now we're going to use the Query Designer. Automatically it says, okay, sweet, you want to make a query? What table will you use as the base? I could double click on this to add it. I could click Add to add it also. And something that happens a lot of times is you don't realize you're adding tables behind the scenes. I have 2 now. I don't need to, so I could simply right click on this and choose Remove Table. I'm not deleting the table. That would be bad. I'm simply removing the table from this view. I'll resize this so we can see all the fields that we have at our disposal. Our goal is to select fields from here and place them down here. A very quick way to do that is to grab this asterisk, drag it, and drop it into field right there. I'm going to bring this up a little bit. Now I can click Run. Here is every record in my table, every field in my table as well. The only problem when I use this, I'm going to go back to View, is that I can't set up any criteria at all. And using criteria is one of the powers of setting up a query here in Microsoft Access. So it's good to drag that star down if you have multiple tables in your query. And you know it's a small table and you don't need to have criteria based off of those fields, but our goal here is to learn and be comfortable with criteria. So I'm going to remove this. I could just right click on it and choose Cut. I could have right clicked on it and pressed Delete on my keyboard. Oddly, you can't right click and choose Delete. It's interesting. Access has always been like that. It's just something to get used to. Well, what fields would we like to query? And see, I like the idea of last name. I'm double clicking to add them. I like the idea of first name. I can also click and drag. How about city? How about zip code? And how about registration date? I could have, by the way, also started from a blank field, clicked this button to see a menu, and made a choice this way. But I really do want to use city. Well, let's test it out. Let's make sure it works. I'll click run. All right, last name, first name, city, zip code, registration date. And if you can't see the whole item, you could click and drag. You could also, oh, by the way, if you ever see pounds, that's the program's way of saying, I can't show you all the information, so I'm going to show you none of the information, and I'm going to indicate that you need to resize this column in order to see all of it, so that mistakes aren't made by just seeing part of a number. To auto size, I could double click here also. Let's go back to design view. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I like to see first name in front of last name. So I will click to select this entire column. Notice how my arrow looks like it's pointing downward. That means I can click to select that entire column. And now that my arrow looks white, my cursor looks white, I can click and drag to rearrange these. Now I have first name before last name. I could also sort by an item if I wanted to. So last name, let's click this down arrow. Notice this is a sort row and choose ascending order. By default, your tables and queries are sorted by just that first field in the table in the order that it was entered originally. So if you want any type of semblance of sort order other than, hey, this is the way I added it into the table, then you use the various sorting techniques. So now we have sorted by last name in ascending order. We also have the ability of clicking here and choosing to sort city from Z to A. If we did that now, we have no sort order in last name at all. It's just sort order by city. And by the way, I could have clicked this. The good news is it keeps your entire record together. It's not just sorting the city and not keeping Chandler with William Sinclair, but we've only sorted by one direction. So we can go here to remove the sort. It took it back to how we originally set it in our main query. Let's go back to design view here and notice we could sort by last name ascending and then city by descending order. We could run it again. And now anytime that we have so Banks, Barrett, Bradford, so that's sorted in ascending order. And then of these, we've got Phoenix, Kansas City. So it really does break it down by sort order. But last name was the first sort. If I wanted it to be sorted by city and then by first name and last name, I can rearrange them. And now all my cities are sorted, and then it's broken down by last name. Now back in design view, I'm going to drag city and put it back over here because I like that placement a little bit better. Before we get too much farther into this, let's save this query. It's just good practice so that we don't ever lose information that we spend quite a bit of time creating. So membership query design. We want a moderately descriptive name there, and for our purposes, it certainly is. I don't really necessarily want these to be sorted at all. Now let's talk about criteria. This is an important piece here. We have this criteria area. Everything down here basically is for our criteria disposal, and we could get more rows down there if we needed. So everything that's on the same row uses the AND criteria. Everything that's on different rows uses the OR criteria. What do I mean by that? Well, let's say we wanted to see everything from Scottsdale. We'll just start with that. We just want to see information from Scottsdale. If we run it, we see Scottsdale. Please disregard this Phoenix one here because that is the new record that we could add if we want to. It's not a valid record. It's not in the sort order. Now let's take a look at the OR criteria. I'll go back to view, Scottsdale or Tempe. Notice when you type it in, you don't have to type those quotes in, but Access adds them in there anyway. Sometimes I might accidentally delete a quote if I'm modifying criteria and I still have the quote on the other side, and it will throw you an error that says, hey, check something out, it's not good. If you get an error and to you don't think you should be getting an error at that time, check the syntax that you have. You might have thrown an extra symbol in there or removed one on accident. So according to this, we want to see from our memberships table, from the city field, either records that meet Scottsdale or Tempe. Run. There we go. Scottsdale or Tempe. We see them all listed here. And it shows us record 1 of 5. We have 5 records that we're drawing information from. Back to view here, let's go ahead and add some and criteria in here. It wouldn't make sense to have our city be Scottsdale and Tempe because our record can only hold a city, one city at a time. But I'd like to see records that meet the idea of Scottsdale and were registered within a specific time frame. With Access, you can use between a date and a date. So I'm going to type in between 1/1/04 and 12/31/05. All right. So when I click here outside of it, notice that Access puts pound signs around that. And if you ever want to see your syntax, notice how it's kind of cut off. You want to see the whole field, you can right click and you can choose zoom. Now we see everything that we typed in there between pound 1/1/2004 pound, so only the dates, the numbers have these pound signs around them, and 12/31/2005. Keep in mind that it's not case sensitive. Access just likes to capitalize items for you. You could type criteria right in here, or you could type it in the cell. Now we're saying we want to see Scottsdale and these date ranges, or just simply Tempe in any range. I ran it, and now we see we've got Tempe that's way outside of those boundaries because we didn't have 2007 that existed within that date mix. And you know what? Look at that. We don't even have any Scottsdale records at all that met that criteria. I'm going to go back to view here, and I'm going to update that. So 1/1/2004 and 12/31, we'll change that to 2006. Now let's see by running it if we have any records that fulfill that. We certainly do. We have 2 from Scottsdale, and Tempe didn't have to meet any date ranges. All right, what if we do want to be able to have Tempe meet that date range? Well, we could do a couple things. We could copy this down and paste it right here so that we have criteria Scottsdale between these date ranges or Tempe between these date ranges, or we could do Scottsdale or Tempe. I cut that and I copied it up there. I used Control X for cut and Control V for copy, or Tempe between these date ranges. So now when I run it, I've cut down my results for Tempe. Now it's official. I am looking at this based upon the same criteria, Scottsdale or Tempe, from January 1st through December 31st of those year ranges that I made. So I'll go back to view here. Hopefully you feel comfortable with what we've worked on so far. We could, instead of using between, we could use greater than and less than signs. So I could do greater than or greater than equal to, and I'll keep the and there. But after the and, I'm going to do less than or equal to. So that's another way to do that range. And I'll zoom in so you can see that there. Zoom. Okay, so it's the same format. This is especially easy to accidentally delete one of those number signs, so be cognizant that you need those pound signs. When I run it, I have the same results because I didn't change anything, but I just want you to know that all those Boolean criteria symbols can work here as well. I'm going to go back to view now, and we're going to delete all this criteria. Notice how my arrow looks like a little like a solid black arrow now pointing right. If I click, I can now hit delete on my keyboard. I've taken out all that criteria. To run it again, I can see that. Nope, no criteria at all. I'm looking at 28 records, which is what we started with. Back to view now. Let's say I'd like to see all the people whose last names start with the letter M. I can do that. I type in like M, and there's something called a wildcard. An asterisk is a wildcard, and it means show me any bit of characters that follow this pattern. So anything that starts with the letter M that's any bit of characters long will show here. I'll click Run. Now look at that, I'm testing it out. I see that I have 4 last names with the letter M. And let's take a look at this one, Matta. M-A-T-T-A. That's 5 characters. Let me show you what that question mark means. We have another wild card. If I wanted to see only names that started with M and had 5 characters, M is character 1, question mark equals character 2, character 3, character 4, character 5. I'm saying I want to see a 5-letter word that starts with M. In other words, a question mark stands for 1 character. If you've ever played Scrabble, it's like a blank tile in Scrabble. It's only 1 letter, but it can be any letter that you want it to be. So we only have 1 result here. Those are the wild cards. I would like to show you one more very, very cool thing that you can have here in Access with your queries. This is called a parameter. Really, in Access, your queries are going to be tied to, very often, tied to reports. And so you'll set up a query that makes sense, and then you'll create a report that's based off of your query. And when somebody runs that report, you can prompt them for information that they want. If they're looking for sales figures, you can prompt them to say, what date range are you looking for? Or what salesperson ID are you trying to search for? So in order to be able to allow users to be prompted, we create a parameter query. So back here in the city field, we want our users to be prompted with a dialog box for the city where they'd like to see where the members are from. The syntax here is using a bracket. If you look at your keyboard, it's a square bracket. It's near the Enter key. And on these keys, you have 2 sets of brackets. You've got the curly braces, as they're often referred, and I call these the square brackets. I think some people just call them brackets, but I want to be precise here. So the opening square bracket, and you can type in whatever you want. What city are you searching for? And I realized I just ended that with a preposition. I should say something like, for which city are you searching? I did end it, though, with a square bracket. If you want to see the syntax, I'll zoom into it. What city are you searching for? Okay, now let's run it. Look at that. There's our dialog box. What city are you searching for? Well, I would like to see Phoenix. There's a funny commercial where someone's trying to send something to Pahonix, but it's Phoenix. Okay, look at that. I've got 14 results. Isn't that awesome? All right, let's take a look here. We could do an OR criteria. Or an AND criteria here as well. What city are you searching for? And we could also do an AND or an OR. Which last name are you searching for? Question mark. Close. Well, let's run this and see how it looks. Which last name are you searching for? I'm looking for Matta. Okay. Which city? Phoenix. Okay. All right, and there is our 1 record that we searched for. Let's go back into View. The key points that I want you to feel comfortable with here so far are that you see your table here, you add the fields to the grid area, and then you control how you're viewing this information by the sort, by whatever criteria it is that you're going to be searching for, and then you save your query to make sure you have it, and you can reuse it over and over and over again. That's the value of creating a query, compiling information, and being able to rerun it as many times as you like. Well, now that we've completed all of our simple query activities, let's recap what we accomplished here. We started off by opening up Access 2007. We went right into Query Wizard, where Access prompted us along and asked us which table and which fields we'd like to extract data from. Then we went into Query Design View, where we had the power and all the tools necessary to start from scratch. We selected a table and we selected the fields from which we would pull data. Not only that, but we set some simple criteria. We took a look at data between a date range. We looked at all the last names that started with the letter M. Not only did we set criteria, But we also set up a sort order for how we'd view that information. And the real power of Access is where we can save this information. And then every time we open up our database file, we can run those queries over and over and over again. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.